Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. I want to take a few minutes to discuss with you why you might want to take a class with me in exactly the subjects that I've studied and taught for a long time, Old Norse and Norse mythology, because I am offering classes outside of any university system and university systems fees on Zoom, ticketed through Eventbrite. Now, I've mentioned these classes here and there pretty often. What I want to do here is actually talk a little bit about kind of the rationale and exactly what it might mean for you to learn to talk like a Viking. Give me a few minutes and I'll explain what I mean. So, trying to navigate this whole YouTube world, find some success in it, and one thing I've been working on with my better half's deep intelligence and research into this is what the title videos. And so this was a video title that got suggested to us, and I thought, actually that kind of makes sense, because here's the thing. There's a lot of people who would say, who wants to talk like a Norse god, right? Like, it makes no sense to most people. But I think to most people who would find this video, it makes some sense, right? So, first of all, if you wanted to learn to speak the Old Norse language, for whatever reason, we're really not talking about a language that's preserved in conversational terms, right? We don't really read the hellos and how are yous in Old Norse. But if perhaps you do want to converse in Old Norse, this is actually a fairly complicated language in terms of its system. Its vocabulary is very closely related to English in many instances, but how to put that vocabulary together is a little bit alien. And even if you speak another related language that still has some of that same systemic complexity like German, there will be elements of the complexity in Old Norse that will surprise you. For example, if you want to say I love you in Old Norse, that's ek an þér. Now, I've shared that before. It's a commonly requested phrase. It is different from modern Icelandic ég elska þig, although the Old Norse equivalent of that ek elska þig is possible in sort of later Old Norse. But what's kind of surprising is notice that there's two words for you between those two phrases, right? Þér is the so-called dative. It's the case that's usually used for the recipient of something, as in the person that, like, I give a gift to, rather than the gift itself. That thick is the accusative case. It's actually the normal case for a verb's direct object. But that on verb, love, takes a dative direct object. That's an unusual thing in Old Norse. A lot of verbs are coded to take, even once you learn what the cases mean, a lot of verbs are coded to take a case that's different from what you expect. Probably the reason for this, if you can call it a reason ultimately, is that love is something you're giving to someone, granting to someone, but you still couldn't necessarily anticipate that. That's not true of elska, right, which takes an accusative object. Now, what if you want to say I love you alone? Well, if you're talking to a woman, it's ek an þér eine. Modern Icelandic, that double N would be pronounced, it's like a TN, eitne. You're talking to a man, ek an þér einu. Now, you have to know what ending to put onto that adjective, ein, alone, in modern Icelandic, in its dictionary form, because it's different from masculine to feminine, and it's also something you have to adjust based on the case. Because if you used elska, you would say to a woman, ek elska þig eina, right? Different ending on that alone than with on. And if you said it to a man, ek elska þig ein, again, modern Icelandic, ein, different ending than on that einum that you would use with ek an þér. All of these things are things you would not know how to anticipate unless you took a course in the language. I have a lot of experience from teaching this language at UCLA and then teaching modern Icelandic at UC Berkeley and explaining this stuff systematically. And my Old Norse beginners class takes you in 16 weeks from maybe not really getting what I'm talking about here to not only reading the prose Edda, right, reading original stories such as the Master Builder putting the wall around Asgard or Odin sacrificing his eye, but also even reading selections from Eddic poetry, poems like Völuspá, we read about the beginning and end of the world, and Hávamál, Odin's council. I think that's the kind of thing that people finding this video would like to do. So consider the long experience that I have in bringing people to a point where they understand this and anticipating what difficulties you will have translating things from Old Norse to English or a modern language to Old Norse if that's what you want to do. It's not typically what I want to do, but I know that many of you do. Be right back and I'll talk a little bit more about how to talk like a Norse god in the context of the myth offering that I have on Zoom for you in the October to March session. Now this October to March session of classes, which starts in the 20s of October, the language classes on Tuesday, October 22nd, the myth readings on Sunday, October 27th. This may be the last session that I do this, but it's the first time that I'm offering a myth offering in translation. So this class isn't about actually reading an Old Norse. If you don't want to deal with the linguistic challenges of Old Norse, you do want to get a deep understanding of what the original sources actually say. It's what this class is for. So what we do in this class is we read the entire Poetic Edda, most of the prose Edda, so that means the sections called Gylfaginning and Skaldskaparmál. We don't read the section Hatatal. There's not much myth there. It's really just about poetic meters in Old Norse. And we read some mythical heroic sagas and Ynglinga saga. This way, you actually get, I'd say about 98% of the material preserved in Old Norse itself, right? This doesn't include Latin language sources that people sometimes cite, like Adam of Bremen or Tacitus, which is really talking about a proto form of this culture that's not very similar probably to this culture. But the Old Norse sources, which are our main thing, right? This is where we actually get notions of gods like Odin and Thor and Loki and what they do and who they are. I want you to be able to form your own ideas about what's there. This isn't about me trying to push my translation on you. This isn't about me, although I would love it if you like buy my translations, obviously. But the point of the class, you read the translation. It doesn't have to be mine. Caroline Larchen's translation of the Poetic Edda is great, if that's more your style. Anthony Falk's translation of the Prose Edda is the one I recommend. We read good translations. I will tell you if it's a bad translation that you find. There are bad translations of the Prose Edda, especially, for some reason. You read the source in modern translation, English, Swedish, whatever language you prefer. And then in class, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over what you read, and I'm going to be looking at the Old Norse text, and I'm going to say, here's a really difficult part. Here's a part where we don't actually really, even the experts have to admit, we don't really know what's meant here. This is a puzzle. And I want you to see why it's a puzzle and see how in the context of another language that expresses different ideas than English does and expresses the same ideas in very different ways, how and why those differences arise, why translators interpret things different ways. And as you get more acquainted with those original texts, I want you to form a better idea yourself that may disagree with my idea about what's really there in those original sources, right? If there's a really controversial passage, a stanza in Hávamál that really, I will just tell you, nobody understands, something like the one about seas and sands and men's minds, every translation of that is provisional because it grammatically doesn't even make sense in the original language. I want you to see that, even if you're not able to read the Old Norse. And I also want you to get a feeling for how the gods and heroes talk, because it's not about the things that we want them to talk about, and it's not in the ways we want them to talk. These are medieval writers or poets with medieval audiences addressing medieval concerns, and they are not interested in making a 20th or 21st century monster manual or in addressing our 20th or 21st century obsessions. I want you to get a sense of what's really there, because there's so much misinformation about these, and even just dramatic, direct, bad misquotings on the internet about them. You can read, the big book of Norse mythology, whatever, the current popular one is. It seems to change every 6 months, or a classic kids book, storybook about Norse myth. Or you can look this stuff up online. But if you can go back to those original sources in a solid translation, actually know what's there, and have a translator's perspective on what's challenging and what's straightforward, I think that you're going to be the most informed person about this of anyone in your friend group, family group, whoever it is that you talk about Norse mythology, Vikings, runes, and your other interests like that with. Let me take my professional understanding of this stuff, consider how many life skills that I missed out on learning, like financial management, something I should have learned before trying to buy a house at 40 and then having to sell it because I couldn't actually make that work. Not complaining. I still live in the place I love with the woman I love, but I missed out on a lot of practical skills that I wish the colleges and stuff would sell to learn things like Old Norse. Let me teach you. Let me take you, who hopefully have better life skills than that, and teach you my sort of life skill, which I know so many people are fascinated by. All right, that's my case. Check out the classes on Eventbrite. Eventbrite links suck. They break all the time, but I'll try to keep the links in the video description and pinned comment current. All right, folks. Really appreciate your support on Patreon. Really appreciate the folks taking these classes. Appreciate the folks buying my books. And from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.